So I'm Gillian Leng. I'm the president here at the Royal Society of Medicine, and welcome to the 2025 Dangoor Lecture, and welcome to many members of the Dangoor family who I know are sitting in the front rows here. Thank you very much for your ongoing generosity in sponsoring these lectures. And welcome to everybody else. It's fabulous to see a full house. I think it pretty much is full, so that's a sign of the interest in the lecture for this evening. Anybody who hasn't been to the RSM before in the audience? A few hands. Well, thank you for coming. It's a great place. It's a great place for meetings, for networking, for fabulous lectures. So do come again and do join the RSM if you want to. I have to do the inevitable pieces of housekeeping. If the fire alarm goes off, it's not a test. We will all have to move outside in an orderly fashion, following the green lights, which will direct us in the right place. If you begin to feel unwell, I have to say that the official information is to go to reception and we will find you support, but there usually are doctors around in this building. And the other thing that was on my list to tell you about was accessible toilets. We have two. There's one at the top of the stairs in the atrium, and there's one opposite all the medals towards the restaurants. And in fact, although I was told to talk about the toilets, it's perhaps a good segue this evening to the topic of the lecture, gut health. Actually, I don't think gut health in my lifetime has ever been so topical. I don't know if I'm unusual, perhaps it's my algorithm, but I seem to get lots of things fed me from the internet. Articles telling me what to eat, what not to eat, when to eat it, etc., etc. It is certainly extremely topical. So I'm therefore delighted to welcome a world expert in this field. In fact, the original pioneer of gut microbiome research. So, Professor Tim Spector, sitting in the front row, can I welcome you up to the stage to talk about how gut health will shape medicine's future, the 2025 Dangoor Lecture.
Thank you very much. I'm very privileged to have such a full house. I'm a bit nervous because I haven't used slides for a while. All my appearances now seem to be on cooking shows or on live TV where you've only got 6 minutes and someone's shouting in your ear. So bear with me, there could be a few mishaps. But anyway, what can possibly go wrong? I'm going to be talking to you broadly about the microbiome, which is the love of my life at the moment, and in it all about how that's led me into nutrition. And I'm going to leave plenty of time for lots of Q&A, where I find we get the most out of these sort of talks. And you can ask me any question. Hopefully we learn more that way than me rabbiting on. So the microbiome, where did it start? Well, for me, I first learned about the microbiome back in about 2009, but I didn't really do much about it until about 2 years later, when I had a personal accident. I had a mini stroke as I was at the top of a mountain in the Alps, and that coincided also with me with a twin experiment, which I'll come to. But what I'd learned as a doctor, and I used to be a rheumatologist, was telling people, well, being overweight and healthy, it's very simple. It's just about eating less, walking more. It's straightforward. And this is what I was telling all my obese patients. And I was, in the meantime, having this as I'd have my muesli for breakfast, maybe the odd croissant, a bit of orange juice, maybe at breakfast or at lunchtime, and a really healthy Marks and Spencer sandwich with fake brown bread, sort of high mercury tuna, and a bit of cucumber for my fiber. So, and thinking this is the really healthy way to go, because this is what I've been taught. You know, this is a nice low-fat meal. It's full of starchy carbs. Everything I read in medicine, everything I've been taught was all about this is the way to eat healthily. And it was only really when I started experimenting myself using one of the early glucose monitors that I realized I was getting these sugar spikes all the time and that this is really terrible for my health and might have had something to do with the fact that I'd gained 10 kilos in about 10 years, which I assumed as a middle-aged doctor was all muscle. And I can see some very muscular doctors in the audience today. Maybe that was my misconception. So, but you know, I've seen the light now. I realize it wasn't muscle, and I changed my diet, and I did slowly reduce my weight without talking in any way about the C word, calories, which I think should be banned, and because we know that the whole precept of advice on nutrition up to this point has been calorie-controlled diets, calorie counting, and interspersed with bursts of low-fat diets. And all of this has been a complete and utter failure and a disaster, and has only helped one group of people, and they're the shareholders of big food companies. So that's how I sort of started this, and this is how my journey started as I got into the gut microbiome. But it all started, I didn't get into nutrition until I really got into the gut microbiome, because like most doctors regard it as a rather, not a real science. They didn't really have any doctors doing nutrition. You know, it all seemed rather trivial and just handing out a few supplements and vitamins. It really wasn't taken seriously, and it probably still isn't. But in 2009, I went to a lecture at a genetics meeting in the US where someone called Marty Blaser was talking about Helicobacter. And we all know Helicobacter. Well, we don't all know Helicobacter, but some people know Helicobacter. It was the bug that was implicated in duodenal ulcers. And before that, it was just put down to stress and excitement and being an executive. You just had too much stress going on, so they cut the vagus nerve and you were cured. And these Australians discovered this bug, and if you got rid of it, you got rid of the ulcers. And that was the first time anyone linked really microbes and health in this way that wasn't just an infection. But Marty Blaser was showing data that when you got rid of Helicobacter, you actually got other problems in your body, in your colon. You had increased risks of other cancers, and things weren't quite right. The immune system got out of kilter, and people started thinking, well, maybe we were meant to have Helicobacter. Maybe something's gone wrong. And that was the first time I'd heard of this concept of the microbiome, which is this community of microbes that live mostly in our lower part of our colon, but all over our body, that are every microorganism. So we think of them as bacteria, but there's also related species called archaea. There are viruses that feed off the bacteria. There are fungi in there. There are parasites. There's all kind of stuff, a lot of which we still don't know about. But that was what the exciting part. And I've now realized that you can study these. There are 100 trillion or so of these guys, and there are 5 times as many viruses. There's a whole world in there, and the way to think of them are as chemical factories, little mini pharmacies, if you like. They take the raw materials in as food, and they convert these into amazing chemicals. Some of them go out as vitamins, others as brain chemicals, and you can see here they have these negative effects on our body as well if they're not well regulated. So generally they're sending out signals to calm everything down. They're like this giant Valium of our body that just is there to keep inflammation down and all these other processes working normally. But they depend on getting the right food supply. So really important, and increasingly you are what your gut microbes eat, I think is key. Now the other thing that surprised me, I was happily doing genetics and twin studies for 20 years or so until I came across the microbiome, and I didn't think I'd ever stray from genetics, but it turns out that we share over 99% of our DNA with each other, but much less than 20% of our gut microbes. And as I'll show you, I think I can tell much more about your health from studying your gut microbes than I can from your DNA. And we are highly personalized in our gut microbes, but we can still tell a lot about our health. So it's a really fascinating fingerprint, if you like. So everyone has their personal fingerprint of gut microbes, but also, there are elements of it that change day to day, but there are also elements that are related to your risk of disease in inflammation, etc., etc. And I can also tell exactly probably what you had for breakfast. And what's really changed in my time in this field is as the genetic revolution gave us new technology, that allowed this totally new area of the microbiome to come into being. So we started with this analysis here, which is a crude analysis called 16S, which meant you just looked at one gene in the microbiome, a single gene that varied a lot. For those of you who know, it's a bit like studying the HLA system and trying to work out everything from that. Did a pretty good job because every bug has a 16S gene in it, but it was fairly crude. And sadly, a lot of tests that you do nowadays clinically still use this very crude system because it's cheaper and it's easier. Then came metagenomic gunshot sequencing, which is what it says on the tin. You like smash up all the genes and you put a giant jigsaw puzzle back together again, and that gives you much more definition. But the last couple of years, we've developed, not me, but brainy people have developed software that breaks it into these tiny pieces and then uses all kinds of intensive computing to work out what those genes are, and from massive databases to look up at these alignments. This means we can get down to really fine detail of strains. So we have thousands of microbial species, and each of those has perhaps hundreds of strains. So the detail is quite immense here, and it's only when we get the detail we're starting to make these amazing breakthroughs. And having gone through the genetics revolution, and for 10 years I was involved in things like candidate genes and linkage, which turned out to be complete rubbish. Lots of papers which aren't worth the paper they're written on, but very good for my career. It's same is turning out with microbiome. The early days really didn't give us much result because we had very small numbers. Now we've got amazing sequencing. We can get big numbers, just like in genetics. It all starting to become clear. So this is a really exciting moment for us. And with this kind of new detail, we can see this. We looked at all our twins from the St. Thomas's Twin Registry, and we can see that as twins live apart, their strains get more dissimilar. So a lot of the microbes that you guys have are because who you've been living with, for better or for worse. But if you divorce and live apart, then you'll start to drift apart in your microbes. And so the genetic effects are pretty tiny here. And you can see these are the similarity of sharing. So the highest is obviously with yourself. You share quite a lot of your microbes. Then with your mother, very strongly within a household. Then you got adult twins, and then you go down this way. So cohabitation is important, and they do bounce around, and you can even share them with your dog as well. Although interesting, not your cat. They're quite fussy. Now, early critics will say, oh, well, taking a poo sample from your stool isn't really good enough. It doesn't reflect what's happening in the colon. And this stopped a lot of the work, particularly in this country that was very skeptical about microbiome research. But actually, we've done a study. We looked at 100 twins, did colonoscopies on them, took 20 biopsies, et cetera, and we see very, very similar patterns of microbiome in different parts of the gut. So I think it is reasonable now to assume that we get a pretty good picture from your stool sample about what is happening in a lot of the rest of the colon where the action is. And it was this paper here that really brought home the first big study done combining diet and microbiome. And it was done with the help of this company, Zoe, that I co-founded in 2017, who brought an entrepreneurial speed, energy, and importantly, cash to the problem, so that we quickly did this study of 1,000 individuals, giving them all identical meals and watching how they reacted to those foods. And it turned out that as well as being highly personalized, those responses to those meals, we also saw links with particular foods that were again, highly personalized. So this told us we could start personalizing our advice to people because it was so closely linked to the gut microbiome. And we found good and bad bugs. And we found this was our initial list of about 15 of these good and bad guys that were related to these health measures as well as diet. And this was the very start of the way we could start to say, how do we get more of these guys and less of these ones? And how we change health. And these links between microbes and our diet are just starting to be revealed. And we needed a study of about 20,000 people to see this link here between coffee and microbes. Now, coffee has had a variable rap over time. As a medical student, I wrote a paper on it saying that coffee drinking was linked to cancer of the pancreas. I didn't get a Nobel Prize for it, but I got a paper in the Lancet, but it was total rubbish. It was an observational epidemiological study that was totally flawed. But for years, we thought coffee drinking was bad for your heart. You've probably heard that, oh, too much, you're going to get tachycardia, you're going to die, get a stroke, etc. Well, the opposite is true. Drinking between 2 and 5 cups of coffee a day has been associated with a reduction in heart disease by about 25%. And it's a health drink. And the reason is it's high in polyphenols, which are defense chemicals. That's why it's so bitter. And it's also a source of fiber, strangely. So there's actually more fiber in this than a shot of orange juice. And people don't think of coffee as a fiber-inducing, high polyphenol health food. It should be on the health food shelf and should throw away the orange juice because that's just sugar and highly processed muck. But importantly here, what we did find, this just shows you how fussy our gut microbes are. There's one microbe sitting in everyone in this auditorium that's waiting for coffee. And if you have it, it goes crazy and has 8 times the abundance of those that are only drinking tea. But it's very patient and it's very selective. It doesn't eat anything else. It just goes into hibernation if it's not being fed coffee. And the reason you get it in the first place, because you're not born with it, is we're surrounded by coffee drinkers. And they're kissing you or breathing on you or doing something else to you, and that gives you the coffee microbe. So this is the strongest association we've found of any food. But it just illustrates the fact that your microbes they're not going to be content to have the same food every day. And if you're not feeding it exactly the right ingredient, it's not going to grow, and you're not going to get this richness in your gut microbiome that you need to thrive, that you need to produce this huge range of chemicals that they can do. So you need diversity. This is what it's trying to illustrate. And it's also the first one. We're going to find many more like this. This is just the very first example. We did a study recently on looking at vegetarians, vegans, and omnivores. And people are always saying, oh, I hate bloody vegans, you know. They're always going on about how healthy they are. And this study confirmed it. Sorry about that. But and you can tell a vegan, by the way, they've always got Lactobacillus brachii and Roseburia hominis. You know, you can tell from a distance. But the important point is, so the average vegan had a better gut health than the average vegetarian, that had a better gut health than the average omnivore. But if you want to see the very, very top 0.1% of people, they tend to be omnivores who ate a lot of plants. Okay? So the key is not whether you eat meat or not, whether you have dairy or not, it's how many plants you're eating. And that is the consistent message here. This is a study that's still under review, should be out soon. 34,000 people. So you see the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. And this allows us to really get really precise results here. And this is something called area under the curve. This is like how much we can predict someone's ability to get some of the, how much you can tell from the microbiome, or you can predict someone's weight, for example, or their BMI or their age. And this is these are two indices of healthy diet, the healthy eating index and the plant diversity index. So look at that. That is sort of off the scale. So just from looking at your microbes, you can pretty much tell whether you're on a healthy diet or not. And better than most markers, you can say how much you weigh. So there's all kinds of other stuff in here that we're teasing out, but it just shows you how powerful the new technology is on the microbiome. It's also used, we used it in perimenopausal women to show why they gain weight around the perimenopause when most women claim they're not eating anymore, and it turns out they weren't lying. Actually true. It's the microbiome that changes, and those microbiome changes are responsible for a greater sugar response. So eating the same croissant is going to produce a bigger sugar response in perimenopausal women than it would have done 5 years earlier. And that sugar response is more likely to lead to extra weight gain later on and increased inflammation. So lots of things are starting to fall in place, observations that we couldn't explain can be explained by the microbiome. Now, the most important role of the microbiome is on our immune system. 70% of our immune cells are in our gut, and they're there for a reason. They're there so they communicate with the gut microbes. We never really understood this before. But the gut microbes are sending out chemicals. The immune system is also sending out chemicals and also receiving those signals and trying to work out what it should do. It's looking to the gut microbiome to say, what's going on in the world? I can't see out there. You tell me what's going on. And a lot of the environment is through the gut, which some people think is the exterior, because through our mouth it is. And the immune system is crucial. So regulating things like inflammation could be crucial to so many diseases. We think that inflammation is linked not only to autoimmune diseases, but increasing allergies that we're seeing in the last 30 years. It's linked to heart disease, it's linked to cancer, it's linked to aging, and it's also linked to mental health disorders. So a lot of our immune system, so there's this clear link between many diseases, our food, our gut microbiome and our immune system. So suddenly, this is all becoming much clearer than it ever was. And there are now these studies showing that as you increase fiber intake, you reduce unwanted inflammation, and this 5 grams, and this is now equating to a 14% reduction in mortality. So for every 5 grams of fiber you add to your diet, epidemiology shows you reduce your risk of death by 14%. And really detailed studies have shown that you can reduce inflammation in RCT in just a few days just by eating the right things. Switching to cancer, immunotherapy is one of the biggest breakthroughs in cancer in the last 10 years. And previously incurable cancers are being helped by these drugs which boost the immune system to attack the cancer. And we, with Dutch colleagues, got together a consortium of several hundred end-stage cancer patients going on immunotherapy, and we found that those who had a Mediterranean diet had a much better prognosis at the beginning of the study. And we also found that those that had a healthy gut microbiome at the beginning of the study had twice the likelihood of surviving than those that didn't. And these are dramatic effects, and yet virtually no oncologist is telling their patients how important their gut microbiome is when they start cancer therapy. And yet, it's the most important thing you can do. And in fact, a lot of them are making it worse by giving them antibiotics. Not necessarily the oncologists, but GPs who aren't aware of these really crucial alignments between the health of your gut microbiome to allow these drugs to work, to encourage the immune system to overreact and then benefit the cancer. So, talking of antibiotics, we react very differently to antibiotics depending on our gut microbiomes. Some people will have a course of antibiotics and be better with it. You'll see the microbiome recover in 2 weeks. Others, it takes 3 months. Others, it can take a year. Very different. We haven't yet worked out why that is, but this explains why many people do have these side effects of antibiotics, and yet that is not widely touted. And there are associations with allergy and obesity, epidemiologically, of people taking lots of courses of antibiotics. The other thing you should know is, whether paracetamol or ibuprofen works better for you, it's probably because of your microbes. A third of antidepressants don't work. That's because of your gut microbes. We've talked about immunotherapy, CAR-T therapy, immune therapies, vitamins, indigestion, proton pump inhibitors, inhalers. All of these have interacting effects with our gut microbiome, and there's probably many more. So again, why drugs work, overdose, don't work. In the future, we're going to be personalizing them. So how do you alter your microbiome? Well, if your diversity drops, that means you less species, you get less of these bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, you get overgrowth of your gut microbes. This causes inflammation in your gut lining. Inflammation is triggered in the blood, and off you start on the disease process. You can modify this with fermented foods, which can increase the production of these fatty acids, which are healthy, reducing inflammation. There's new treatments looking at actually growing up viruses to attack your gut microbes, your bacteria, which is really cool, particularly in cancer. That's a really interesting area because you can really target them, and they're supposed to be quite safe compared to other modalities. There's transplanting. Fecal transplant is another way of diversity. And there's also things like prebiotics and general probiotics. And we studied prebiotics we created at Zoe a blend called daily 30, which is 30 freeze-dried plants to give you 5 grams in a scoop. Now, I'm dead against supplements, so I wasn't going to promote anything if we didn't do a trial, so we did a randomized trial of it. Fairly big by the standards of the field, 116 in each arm, a prebiotic against a probiotic and a control, and it did really well. And we managed to change about 40 key microbe groups, increasing the good guys, reducing the bad guys. And the probiotic capsule, which was Lactobacillus rhamnosus, which is a big, important one, only changed about 4 microbial species compared to 48 with the prebiotics. So I think prebiotics are where the action is. You don't have to specify what you're doing, you're just increasing everything. It's massive fertilizer. So, and we saw improvements not only in gut health, but within 3 days, mood and energy. Really exciting, as well as all the gut effects. So how does the microbiome change our dietary advice from where we are, what I was taught, what probably the doctors in the audience were taught? Well, I think it totally blows out the water, the idea that we're just this tube or funnel, a furnace, if you like, that burns energy, and food is just energy in the form of calories. We've got to start talking about quality, not calories. And we've got to start talking about the diversity of the foods, not worrying about whether macronutrients are important. They're pretty irrelevant, really. It's about how do you get your 30 plants a week in. That can be nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. Even tiny amounts of Indian spice mix have been shown, just 1 teaspoon a day have been shown to improve your gut microbiome in 2 weeks. So it's however you can get it. Fermented foods. Studies have shown that you can reduce inflammation by having regular fermented foods in just 2 weeks. All the inflammation parameters changed dramatically in a trial. We did a study of 10,000 people who don't take fermented foods, and over 50% of them within a week reported less bloating, less hunger, better mood, better energy, better bowel movements. So I think everyone should be having more fermented foods. That should be part of national guidelines, and it's not. Eating the rainbow, that's because of the polyphenols. That has been around. That's one of the ones that was originally in all these guidelines. They thought that's because it has a few vitamins in it, but it's for these polyphenols that we can discuss more. They're in coffee, tea, also in olive oil, and a lot of bitter or colorful foods. Reduce high-risk processed foods. We've got a new app we're developing that's going to replace this old-fashioned concept of ultra-processed food. So at the moment, ultra-processed food is 50% of, or nearly 60% in this country of everything we eat. And it's about 70% in children. But that's too broad. So we've got a new app, developed a scale, a 5-point scale, that actually looks at the risk of these foods, so you can go in a shop and see what you're eating. And we also want to reduce the eating window, so-called time-restricted eating. You might have heard of intermittent fasting. This is a form of it. You're not changing the calories, but you're changing the time you eat. So you try and eat in a 10-hour window, leaving 14 hours ideally for your gut to recover. And that seems to be a better way of eating. It's probably what our ancestors used to eat before we got into snack culture and eating 6 times a day, because that's what the food companies told us to do. So they're pretty good guidelines, and it varies between 5 and 6 whether I add in extra ones, but I'm pretty happy these are. If you eat this way, you're eating the Zoe way, you will improve your health. The Zoe does this kit with a gut microbiome testing, continuous glucose monitoring, lipid testing, algorithm, etc. That costs money, and many people say, well, it's not free, therefore you shouldn't be promoting it, so I'm not. I am promoting this, which is free, the podcast, the Zoe Science and Nutrition podcast, which is now the #1 English-speaking nutrition podcast, if you haven't heard it, completely free, and experts come on and discuss different topics. I've got a nearly free cookbook, which has 100 Zoe recipes, which is a really easy one. I've written quite a few books. This has sold many more, which tells me I'm always going to do books with pictures in the future, because people don't like too much joined up writing. And so, yeah, do go for these as further. There's many more routes to this, as well as even following on Instagram. You can learn things if you only have an attention span of 30 seconds. And my message to you is, I think you should change the way you think about food forever, because food is definitely the best medicine, and we need to make a big change. Thank you.
To take a seat, Tim.
And hopefully we've got still got some time for questions.
We've got about half an hour for questions.
Marvellous.
So that's great. And just to say that people can use Slido. Is there? No. Are there some instructions coming up on Slido? I mean, that's for those of you that are shy. And usually our SM audiences are not shy, and we've got the traditional wave your hand and have a microphone. So we'll start with that, and I can see a hand here. Is there a microphone anywhere near? This is about the first, second, third, fourth, fifth row. Microphones anywhere?
I can shout.
There should be mics, though.
There was supposed to be 2 microphones.
Yeah. And I know there are.
Well, I finished too early. That's why they've all gone on their tea break.
Bit worrying.
Well, shout.
Yeah.
We'll repeat it for those who can't hear.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting and reassuring. But I have to ask, what's your view on Ozempic and what that does to the microbiome?
Okay, so the question is about what's my view on Ozempic and what does it do to the microbiome? I think that the general category of all those drugs, we call GLP-1 drugs, is probably the most important drug in our generation. And I think it has the chance to make the biggest impact on health of any drug that I've known. So you've got to bear that in mind when people are criticizing it because of the way it's currently been used and the fact that of 1 million people that have used it in the UK, probably only a few thousand have been given it from the NHS. But the trials show that this drug, when used properly, not only reduces weight by 15 to 20%, and you keep it off, but it reduces mortality from heart disease, stroke, cancer. It even reduces autoimmune disease, inflammation, dementia, Parkinson's disease. It's looking like it cures everything. This is on trials of people who were obese or had diabetes. We don't know what it does to people of near normal weight or, just want to get slimmer for the summer holidays. We do know that once you stop it, your appetite signal goes right back up and you put the weight on super rapidly, and there's not much you can do to stop that. I think there's a huge chance that if we did use it properly, it would save the NHS billions. There seems a reluctance of the government to do that, but I think the evidence is building that it would be worth it. Estimates say that in four years, you would recoup all the money for the NHS. Obviously, using it recreationally has a problem because there are risks involved. 1 in 1,000 risk of having pancreatitis and being admitted to hospital, etc. That are not trivial. The other thing I worry about is it also is extremely effective in alcohol in addictions. So it reduces by about 50% smoking, gambling, alcoholism. But if it's doing that, what is it doing to your brain? Will it take away, for example, a bit of motivation for the entrepreneur or the risk taker? So this is a bit unknown. But in general, I'm in favour for people who need it. I'm not in favour at the moment of people who don't really need it. It's an amazing drug, but you can't stop it. We should use that opportunity when they're on it to give them the right health advice, get them off the junk foods, and get them on real food. And no one's doing that at the moment. So there's lots of caveats, but I think we ought to embrace what it is. It is a real revolution.
I think there's a microphone now, but we've got quite a few on here. So I'll ask one from here, Tim, and then we can go back to the live audience. Have you noticed any links between different cultural groups and nations and the gut microbiome?
Well, there are huge differences around the world, mostly about how closely they're following the SAD diet, the standard American diet. Right. So the British gut is pretty similar to the American gut, although not quite as bad. So when we compare their scores, they're much worse generally on Zoe than when we look elsewhere. There seem to be differences as you go in the south of Europe. You find healthier guts because there's more Mediterranean diets. But the most healthy ones are in Africa and India, where there's much less highly processed foods. So there are these big differences. And the healthiest is probably, in our hunter-gatherer tribes, where I spent time in Tanzania, where, they don't get any chronic disease. And their immune systems are perfect, and they have twice as many microbes in their guts as we do in the UK. We've basically killed them off through food, the chemicals in food, antibiotics, sterile living, etc.
So is it that the ultra-processed food have inherently bad things in them, or is it that we've just supplanted the healthy plant-based stuff with the ultra-processed?
It's a combination. Our gut microbes have been starved by having the stripped-down ultra-processed foods which lack fibre and diversity. And you've also got the chemicals like the emulsifiers, the artificial sweeteners going in there, messing up the gut microbes and the gut wall.
Right, we want to go to the audience. There's a hand here, please.
Thank you very much. I was wondering what you thought about oxalates, because on social media you get so much information about the greens that are supposed to be wonderful food. They're full of oxalates, and should we not eat them?
So every now and again there's some big thing on social media, whether it's oxalates, phytates, lectins, something called anti-nutrients. You might have heard of these terms. And someone becomes a big internet star or TikTok star overnight because they're saying this is evil, we have to stamp it out. There's, you must never eat kale again. They're pushing it onto you, they're trying to poison you. It's all rubbish, basically, is the simple answer, because they're quoting evidence that is test tube type evidence where you can extract some bit of that from the plant, you add it to a Petri dish, you can show that it inhibits these chemicals, it doesn't allow vitamins to be absorbed in the body or whatever it is, a pseudo-scientific experiment that's not done in a clinical trial, and it has no relevance to the complexity of eating a diet. We don't just eat one chemical when we eat foods. We don't just eat oxalates. We eat it in a whole range of foods. We don't just have one thing in a salad. We should have lots of variety. And the more variety you have, the less relevant any one thing is. And these combination of foods all counteract each other. So I'm not going into the specific details of oxalates, but it's the same story, all these anti-nutrients. All the studies show that if you have a rich variety of foods and fiber from whatever source, you're going to have a better health, better gut, better heart. So forget all that stuff. It's reductionist. And most of the people doing it, they're not nutritional scientists, just scaremongers.
I can just about see a hand at the very back, and you're almost in the dark up there, I'm afraid, but I could just about see you. So give someone some exercise running up to the back.
Thank you. Hi, Tim. I wanted to ask, why do you think that this talk of the microbiome is still not mainstream, that doctors are still not talking about it? Is the science muddled, or are the people, or is the science just not big enough yet? What do you think it is?
Well, it's very young science. It's only 20 years, really, and you know, in its entirety, really, and only been going really for 10 years. There aren't enough people who are teaching it to medical students or doctors getting retrained in it. Most of us in it are too busy doing the research to actually spend time going back and teaching people. And you've got to realize how long it takes the medical profession to change direction. The duodenal ulcer discussion I gave you, took 20 years after the findings of Barry Marshall to stop surgery on the vagus nerve. And that 20 years it took. So 20 years is about the right time, unfortunately, in a very conservative area where no one's empowered because there isn't one speciality dealing with it in most countries. So the gastroenterologists haven't embraced it, the microbiologists haven't embraced it, the nutritionists haven't embraced it. It's sort of falling between the gaps. It needs someone to form a new college or something to get it going, or one of those groups to take it on and say, this is ours, we're going to own it, and we're going to teach everyone in our speciality to do it. There hasn't been that much funding, and you can see some of those early results weren't clear. The technology wasn't really perfect 10 years ago. So I think it's only really now that it's being clinically useful, and we should embrace it, but that's my view.
No, and 20 years seems to be typical for change processes, whatever you look at. But are there any obvious confounders, the classic social class, smoking, any of those things that...
Well, they're all. I mean, microbiome is both cause and consequence. So that's why it's tricky. So when you see someone has a disordered gut microbiome, and, we've now... The way we look at it, it used to be, say, just diversity. That was the number of different species, the way you said, is it healthy or not? We've got a better test now. That paper I mentioned, we're going to be publishing 100 good and 100 bad microbes. And that ratio is what's important. But when you're ill, that causes inflammation. That will lower your good number of good bugs, and that allows the pro-inflammatory ones to get bigger. So there's always this mix between obscuring causality. But at the same time, there's very good evidence that if you've, about 1 in 1,000 people have a microbe in them that we've shown gives you a 20-fold risk of having colon cancer, which is huge. But no one's ready to accept or take that risk that should be used as a screening tool yet, because the science isn't that precise. So you keep repeating that test, you'll get exactly the same result. So it's going to take time.
Bowel cancer, interesting question here that links with that. How does a bowel prep prior to a colonoscopy affect the microbiome? What advice would you give to a patient post-bowel prep? How long might it take their microbiome to recover?
Oh, this has been studied, interestingly. And so anecdotally, if you ask gastroenterologists doing this, they'll tell you that people with, say, irritable bowel syndrome, about 1 in 5 might actually get better or worse after it. They might recover. The vast majority of people, it recovers within a week back to where it was. And if you think about it, it's quite normal that we wouldn't have a system that was so dependent, that was so weak, that an infection would wipe out years of good work and there'd be nothing left. It'd be very sad if I lost all my good microbes just from a bit of jippy tummy. So we've got natural defenses. They hang around in the crevices. maybe our appendix, and then they very quickly come out when the storm has passed, whether it's a bowel prep or it's an infection, and they start again. So it doesn't take very long.
So you can't see it as a good chance. You've had a good clear out, you can start again with healthy stuff.
Well, there is potentially, because in those early days there might not be much, but and it is a good. It's always never too late to improve your gut microbiome. So it is a pretty good opportunity to, get that list, the 30 plants, the fermented foods, eating the rainbow. Really good time to do it, but generally it will recur on average.
Back to the audience, where to start. I think there's a red arm just by the pillar here. I think a mic's coming. Yes.
Thank you very much for a really interesting talk. I was wondering what you thought the effects are of plant-based sweeteners like stevia.
So yes, some people are looking into these new type of sweeteners. So the ones in the past that have been implicated in poor gut health or affecting the gut lining, like sucralose or ACE-K, are being replaced by stevia, and a new one, monk fruit, I think, is in the US, is licensed, seen as natural, although stevia in your drinks is now made by microbes, interestingly, using precision fermentation. So they don't pluck it off the tree anymore. It's far too expensive, so they got microbes genetically modified to make it, but it's still called natural. There aren't many studies of stevia. There's suggested it's better than the other ones, but an Israeli study did show it did alter your microbiome composition. So I think the jury's still out. At the moment, I would put it above the rest, and hopefully monk fruit will be as good or better. So question mark, but not definitely bad. It may be bad for other reasons. Has a metallic taste, gets us all addicted to really sweet things we don't need, but gut-wise, not too bad.
Yeah, not definitely bad. I'm not sure if that's a positive or not. What about the gentleman here? If you could just wait for the mic. I think one's coming. Brilliant. Great.
Thanks very much. Fantastic presentation. Could you just comment on your views on Henry Dimmelsby's approach to dealing with obesity? That's question one. And question two, could you comment on the diets of Eskimos and people who just live a very simple meat-based diet?
Thank you.
Well, Henry Dimmelsby was looking a bit chubby last time I saw him. He won't mind me saying that, but it was the Daily Mail called him the obese diet guru. He's not that overweight, but he set out a very complex framework of things to do, which the government ignored. But apparently this government is looking at that food policy again. I agreed with most of the things in his document. For those who don't know what this is the state of the nation's food and the food system and what we should change. A lot of it are environmental changes to make food more sustainable, but also more healthy. He did have a big push to improve, have more regulations in schools and hospitals, all these things, which I totally agree with. We should certainly be protecting sick people in hospitals and our children from the horrors of 90% ultra-processed foods, which is just making them sicker and more obese. So that seems pretty obvious to anybody. So I'm in broad agreement with that strategy. He got criticized by some people because he said he wanted to work with the food industry. I don't know if that was your point or not, but I think you have to pick out some people in the food industry who do want to change, and we'll try and work with them as models for the others who don't want to change. There's no point going to talk to Nestle or someone like that makes 90% of their profits from these foods. You need to talk to someone who wants to highlight the range of foods that are more healthy. And at the moment, they're not able to because the labeling system in this country, which we still use the European one, we don't have to, but we still do, is against anyone trying to produce healthy foods. If you've got a healthy bread, you can't stick it on the label. we weren't able to put our prebiotic fiber as gut-friendly until we added an ingredient to it. Do you know what that was? Calcium. Yeah, exactly. Or you could have added manganese or something. So it's nonsense what the British labelling system is, and the consumer is losing out. So anyway, we could go on for an hour on that. But yeah, in general, yes, he had a lot of good points. It's well worth reading his book, Ravenous, if you want to look at food policy.
There are two. Oh, yes.
People on?
Eskimo.
Eskimos, yes. So Eskimos they've evolved genes that allow them to break down fats and keep they don't seem to get the same inflammation to the levels of fats that we do. So it seems like some of these isolated populations have evolved special mechanisms to deal with these rather strange diets. They don't live particularly long lives, so I don't think we should all be going on an Eskimo diet, eating whale blubber and things like this. But in a very harsh environment, they have worked out ways to do pretty well. I think that's the key. But I think if the average Eskimo did go on the average Zoe diet, they'd do well. And they're not called Eskimos anymore.
There are two hands in the middle there. If you could pass the mic across, and I will take both of those questions. But I'm going to ask one from here first, because I like this question. Does food include drink? And if so, are fermented drinks better? And I don't know if the questioner was thinking about beer or something else.
Well, in a general medical audience, I would suspect that's not true. That's fine to ask. So fermented anything is better than non-fermented in general as a broad topic. Depends what else you add to it. But if you can ferment it, you're changing the complexity of that food or drink into something that's richer in more molecules, more chemicals, more aromatics. So it just produces much more of it. That's the difference between grape juice and red wine. Grape juice is just sweet. It's, two-dimensional. Something like wine has all these extra flavors and complexity because it's produced extra chemicals. And it's doing the same, it has the same effect internally, the things you can't smell, the polyphenols. That's why it has those tastes, and the polyphenols are good. So generally getting more polyphenols, more chemicals, that's more fuel for your gut microbes. So that's one reason. The other is most fermented foods, they start off with live microbes, and they would go on to yogurts, etc., and they are super healthy. Kombucha is kefir, really healthy drinks. There's something called water kefir, tibikos, also really healthy. If you kill it, interestingly, there's some evidence that it still works. So people have done some experiments with milk kefir, and they've pasteurized it, given it to volunteers, and it still works. And this has really puzzled the field for the last 5 years because a lot of experiments failed because their controlled group had dead microbes, and they seem to do nearly as well. So there's this whole new field called postbiotics, which is, they used to be called ghost biotics as well. That was another name. Or zombie biotics. But it's not as crazy as you think. Just think what a vaccine is. It's a dead microbe. And it's the cell wall of that microbe causes an immune effect, and it's quite possible a lot of these dead postbiotics having an immune effect. So this means the good news for people who like beer, it's full of dead yeast. So that could be helping you. Have that one for free. And, even sourdough bread, dead but could be useful. But yeah, so this is a really new field in the microbiome is, can postbiotics be useful? And I think they can. All the evidence is showing they can, and they'll be much safer and quicker to get in the food system. We just kill everything and add it to our food. Marvellous.
And I think I heard wine is better than grape.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I should say, we did do a study, and we did show that red wine had a positive benefit on the gut microbiome in about 7,000 people in different countries. So there could be something in this French paradox that red wine, and epidemiologically, although overall alcohol and probably wine drinking is bad for you, with it, if you're worried about heart health, there's consistent evidence that red wine is good for you, and it's probably because of the high polyphenol content, although there's nothing live about it.
Okay, Anna, better, you've got the mic.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. I just want to comment that the longevity of this science is actually much longer than 20 years, because I'm a doctor from Ukraine, and in post-Soviet Union countries, we were always taught to look at the gut health at the very beginning of almost any disease, especially in dermatology. So the first thing what we were basically prescribing to patients were probiotics, prebiotics, and so-called sorbents, high fiber medications. They were not medications, they were basically supplements. And this is like the medicine was so preventative in post-Soviet Union countries that I want to say that I'm very glad that Western medicine is now joining Eastern European medicine today. And my question would be about gluten for healthy people. What do you think, how much we can play with it? How healthy or unhealthy it is if there is no evidence of celiac disease? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, actually, before the Ukrainians, I should say, the Chinese and the Indians were several thousand years before were into gut health. My point was that we didn't have the technique to know what the microbes were doing. So most medical traditions have known that the gut is the center of health. Western medicine was slow on that, so that was my point. But you're absolutely right. And the UK is way behind the rest of the world in fermentation and its links with health. Hopefully we're going to change all that. The question I had was about gluten. I don't think there's any problem with gluten in people who don't have celiac disease. There's a small amount of people who are gluten intolerant, although studies show that when you test them formally, only about a third of them are actually intolerant. It's more a thought they might be. So yes, 1% of the population probably have some form of celiac. There's probably another 1% that are generally intolerant to it. No, the rest of the population don't have to worry about it.
Yes, and you've got the mic.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Two questions, really, just following on from that, really. A bit of sort of translation, bed-to-bedside type question. Given all the knowledge and this huge amount of science and research that's building up, where do you think the sort of future is, either immediate or later on, for UK weight management services, given where they are? You've touched upon Ozempic, but do you have any other thoughts about where they should be going more rapidly than they are? And the second question, given that this morning I was doing a clinic with multiple patients who tell me how they can't lose weight, et cetera, for various reasons, what word should we be using instead of the word calorie that will be universally understood by people, society in general, because it seems to be completely ingrained in everyone's mindset? And I fully agree with you, it's the wrong word, but where do you think that should go? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there were several questions in there. Your first one was the...
approaches weight management.
Weight management.
Yeah.
Well, I think the NHS should be setting up much more weight management services. It should be offering GLP-1 drugs that are supervised, not just randomly done for people getting it online themselves and giving up and bouncing back. They should be. I hear, patients with BMIs of 44 who are being turned it down because they don't yet have diabetes. I mean, it's appalling. These people are going to cost the NHS a fortune, and we have such rigid rules on this that nobody's giving it, and a lot of GPs are frightened to give it because don't have the follow-up services. So it's a complete disaster at the moment. There is no weight management service in the UK, and it needs to have a clear model. And I think hopefully the GLP-1s are going to shake that up, create it. But every patient should have advice on nutrition, and there aren't enough nutritionists, certainly not dietitians, they just attach to hospitals, they can't possibly cope. So we need online services that people do and courses, etc. That's the way forward. So for people who are obese, bariatric surgery is the other one that might be a better solution. In the US, they're using much more use of other drugs, including metformin and things. And I think it just needs a much more community-based approach that has the backup of knowledge. And we need to switch people from, the patients we're talking about who are obese are probably having 80 to 90% of their food as this high-risk, ultra-processed food that's making them hungrier. And a lot of people don't realize the food they're eating makes them overeat, by an average of 25%, probably much higher in certain instances. Just doing a Channel 4 program on obesity at the moment and just interviewing some of these families, they have no clue that what they're eating, because it says low fat on the packet or low calories, is actually just making them consume more and more and more of it. So we've just got to change people to thinking, what is the quality of the food? Can you eat food that actually fills you up rather than makes you hungrier? And we've got to change food labeling and stop this health halos on all this junk food. So there isn't just one thing. We just need to get everything together. And we're so far behind in this country, it is really hard. But I think, I'm hoping that it's going to be a ground-up movement. There'll be enough people saying, well, if you start thinking that the gut is the center of things, and you start saying, what does my gut need to eat well? And if you do that, everything else follows. A lot of people are getting this and are telling me that this has changed the way they think about food, made them lose weight without thinking about calories. And we've shown that we can do it with Zoe. We do not talk about calories at all. And it does work. If you just shift what people are eating from this stuff that makes them hungry to start the stuff that makes them full.
We need to finish it in about 5 minutes because there's a drinks reception out there. There'll be a rush on red wine, I suspect. And I've got a whole host of questions here and lots of hands in the audience. I don't know what to do. Who's waving the most? What about the gentleman over there? Happened to be in my field of vision.
Right. Yeah, thanks for a fascinating talk. I think you got your son to take part in a burger diet for a month. So I just wondered what your main findings from that were, and has he forgiven you yet?
Well, my lawyer said I'm not supposed to comment, but I will. He's going for class action against me. But I was, from my book, Diet Myth, I was doing lots of self-experimentation. I'd just finished the French cheese diet. It never quite made it into a bestseller because 1 day is really good, 2 days not so good, 3 days you really don't want more French cheese. And I was due to do the McDonald's test, which was to, it wasn't a month, I was going to 10 days of just eating McDonald's. And it turned out that my son was the perfect victim stroke volunteer because he loved McDonald's, he was a student, and he was going to get free meals. So, win-win. And he did it. He said this is going to be dead easy, but he ended up losing 40% of his gut diversity in that time and felt pretty unwell. I sent him food parcels, but we never regained his gut microbiome until I think about 3 years ago. So it took years to get his gut microbiome back. And that just gave me an insight. It's an N of 1 study, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it just shows you how many people in this country are having that continuously, starving their microbes of fiber, hitting them with all those additives and getting nothing out of it. So he has forgiven me, but only until he wants more money.
Yes.
Yes. You know what it's like.
Sympathetic laughter from the audience, yeah. I just want to ask a quick question from there, because it occurred to me while you were speaking. Is there any difference between decaffeinated and caffeinated coffee?
The evidence shows not very much. Right. So Lawsonobacter, our microbe, likes both. It doesn't mind too much. Some decafs have a more chemical treatment, which might it might not like as much, but if you get a good quality decaf, it's probably just as good.
Well, I really can't ask any more questions, but you'll be around outside for a little bit if people can manage to collar you over a drink, perhaps. Because I now need to thank everyone for all those fantastic questions. Far, far too many to ask, I'm afraid. I want to thank the staff who've organised this evening, because it's remarkable how much effort it takes to put on an event like this. I want to thank you all for coming. Come again. I want to thank the Dangoor family for their generous support. We really appreciate it. And of course, most importantly, need to thank the wonderful speaker, Professor Tim Spector, and I've got something to give you, I hope. It's over here. Yeah.
Wow,
We need to have a photo taken. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And I hope you're not going on the tube with that.
Yeah, slip into my pocket.
Slip into your pocket. Yeah. No, thank you so much. That was amazing. We'll see you all out there.